What is up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and today we are ranking the discography of ZAO. And hey, if you like to be kept up to date with the best and brightest metal bands and albums from the underground and above, then stick with me by hitting that subscribe button down below. That's right, we're doing a ZAO tier list, and they have so many amazing albums. Let's talk about which ones are the best, which ones are the worst, but as always, this is just my opinion, and let's just dive right into it with All Else Failed in 1995. One of the earliest true metalcore albums, actually, and as such, very raw. Lots of very kind of straight hardcore influence on this one. In terms of the lineup, and we're going to be talking about that from album to album here, because there are a lot of variations that go around. We've got Sean Jonas on vocals, who later went on to go to Symphony in Peril, which is unfortunately now inactive, because I really enjoyed that band. Roy Gowdy on guitar, Mick Cox on bass, and Jesse Smith, of course, on drums. Has some pretty cool moments on it, especially on the bass guitar. I like the dynamic changes of Endure and Growing in Grace, but songs kind of run together. It's definitely sort of important in context and getting the ball rolling on this genre, but not the most fun to revisit versus, say, like an Opposite of December or When Forever Comes Crashing Down. I'm going to go ahead and put this one at D tier, but that's just so that I can have some variation in the sort of quality level between all the different albums. Otherwise, they'd all end up on sort of the same tiers, and that would be pretty boring. If I was just like reviewing this album and giving it a score, it definitely wouldn't be a D. Then we have the Splinter, the Shards, the Birth of Separation in 1997. I remember seeing this artwork in the store and checking it out. Same lineup on this one, similar feel. Vocals just feel a little bit dull for me, which is very sort of hardcore in general. It's very much of the era in general, I guess I would say, to be fair. Has those little dramatic spoken word portions too that are such a cliche now, but an important part of the genre. Again, the bass is probably my favorite part of this album. Exchange is kind of a low-key banger. In Loving Kindness 2 with those drums in the beginning. Particle has a really ominous intro to it. Speaking of which, just a very foreboding band in general, which is something I tend to associate with ZAO over others in the genre. It's something that kind of makes them a little bit unique in terms of their sound. But I'm going to go ahead and, again, put this one at D tier, a little bit higher than the debut, but yeah, got better albums on the way. All right, then we've got Where Blood and Fire Bring Rest in 1998. This is the first with current vocalist Dan Wyant, bringing those more metal vocals this time around, less on the hardcore side. He has a very unique style too. That's another thing that I think separates them from the pack, is they've got this very almost like raspy, almost like black metal-y kind of vocal in certain areas, which is neat. We also get Russ Cogdell for the first time on bass and guitar, and Brett Tatar on guitar, bass, and piano, with drummer Jesse, the only returning member at this point. Still very raw and of the time, but this is considered a landmark record, and I would agree. Like, as far as their early period goes and kind of finding their sound, this is where it's at. I'm hearing more experimentation on tracks like To Think of You Is to Treasure an Absent Memory. Great, those long metalcore titles, right? Especially back in the 90s. Still pretty clunky. March has a pretty infectious groove to it. Gave me some Living Sacrifice vibes in the beginning, to name drop another Christian band from this era. Ember has kind of a Pantera riff to it a little bit. Lots of great textured drumming on this one too. Ravage Ritual, For Fair Desire. Honestly, this album's pretty solid across the board. I wouldn't just elevate it to S tier just because it's a landmark. In terms of like overall quality, where it fits in with the rest of the discography and re-listenability, I'm going to put it at B tier. All right, here we go. Another big one. We've got Liberate Te Ex Inferis from 1999. Another classic cover art, just overall from this era. I love just looking at that. It's very eye-catching. with the big eye on the cover. Jesse and Daniel noted Neurosis as an influence on this album, and this is actually Jesse's favorite album, according to the wiki anyways. At this point, they took on Scott Mellinger on guitar and Rob Horner on bass, with Brett cycling out. With tracks, Savannah comes in with a vengeance after the eerie, quiet intro. We've got more Living Sacrifice vibes in the drums on this one. Wailing guitars on this one, too. Hearing some parallels in riffs between this and Opposite of December, which came out this same year, one of my personal favorite metalcore albums. Autopsy bringing those alternated palm mute and picking hooks and plenty of headbanging. The vocals are absolutely vicious on this thing. There's a great acoustic moment with If These Scars Could Speak, which again is just a peak metalcore song title. Plenty of moodier moments too. It's a very dynamic record. It's very kind of conceptual sounding in nature. This sound was a good chunk of my high school experience. I'm 16 forever when I listen to albums in this vein. Definitely a fan favorite, and I concur, but I don't think it's perfect. For anyone that says that it's S tier, I would not argue with you for a second. I've been really sort of at war with myself just for sort of impact and just recognizability too, in terms of, you think ZAO and this is one of the first albums you think of, so I could get that. But again, I don't want to pack the same tier with too many albums. I'm going to ultimately put it at A tier, and again, that is just like my opinion, man. Then we've got the self-titled in 2001, same lineup minus Russ, although he's still noted as a composer in the notes. The band supposedly broke up on stage during this tour in Pennsylvania, which I guess adds to this whole sort of meme almost of them being known as this band with forever lineup changes, but it stabilizes eventually. We'll get there. Interesting industrial metal vibes at times on this album in the drumming, but a little mathy too. You got tracks like 5 Year Winter and Alive Is Dead. Some vague like Fear Factory comparisons, but then Witch Hunter even mixes this with acoustic guitar for kind of a Nine Inch Nails sound. I'd say this one is also pretty experimental, but just with a different vibe than the previous record. I appreciate the brevity at just 36 minutes. Sometimes these guys can get a little bloated in the songwriting process, but not so much here. You got tracks that are just straight ragers too. Trash Can Heads is some heavy shit. The Race of Standing Still, another great title too. Awesome head bobber. On the flip side, some clean singing here and there too, which is a nice addition to further vary things up. I really like this one. In fact, this might be sacrilege, but I might even like it just a little bit more on the whole than Liberate, just because it's very consistent. I guess I would say there are fewer moments where I decide to kind of skip. Like, I love Liberate, I love all the tracks on it, but a lot of those tracks get to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm kind of done with this track, I'm ready to go to the next one. Whereas with this album, it's a little bit tighter, and so I don't end up having that feeling as much, if that makes sense. But these two are pretty darn close to each other, I would say. 2002, we have Parade of Chaos, and this and the newer version of All Else Failed were recorded at the same time, which feels like a lot to me. Like, that's a lot to take on in a single year. In terms of the lineup, we've got Rob ducking out here, leaving them down to a trio with Daniel, Scott, and Jesse. And for context, too, this is the same year as Killswitch Engage, Alive or Just Breathing, Norma Jean, Bless the Martyr, Kiss the Child, Atreyu, Suicide Notes, Bleeding Through, Hopes Falls, The Satellite Years. So metalcore kind of moving into, it's coming into its own, but also moving into an overall more melodic direction, I would say. But this album has kind of like a grungier sound to the guitar, which is interesting, especially on like opening track. It's got this very Bleach era Nirvana mixed again with some mathcore vibes, toying with some clean singing again, especially on Angel Without Wings is the one that comes to mind. That one's a little bit catchy. It sort of sticks with you. The compositions are often just kind of meandering though, and ultimately I would even say boring, but some points for continued experimentation. It's definitely not like a terrible album. You also get the occasional hit like Free the Three and A Pirate's Prayer, but ultimately this is sort of one of my albums that I'm just not as big a fan of, and just doesn't have that same kind of magic to it, I would say. So I'm going to put this one at C tier. And then, like I said, they also re-recorded 8 tracks from All Else Failed for this 2003 version of it with the current lineup. Nothing particularly of note, really. It's like, yeah, it sounds better, definitely. But the thing is, the songs just weren't that interesting or great to begin with, so it almost feels like, what's the point to me? It's that expression of like, you know, you can polish a turd, but it's still a turd. And that's a harsh expression. I don't think that the original is a turd by any means, but the expression still stands. Like, if you take something that's not that great to begin with and you just make it sound better, it's still sort of whatever. I'm not trying to be overly harsh, but I will put it at C tier because I do think it sounds better than the original version. Again, this is why I had to tier everything out and maybe put some things down lower than maybe what you would have liked to have seen. All right, but then 2004, we get The Funeral of God, and Jesse is gone. it's like that South Park meme, and it's gone. So at this point, there are no original members left in the band, but we do get Russ back, and then new additions in Sean Koschik on bass and Stephen Peck on drums. I would argue that this is one of their most focused albums. Like, it's very, they picked a sound and they just stuck with it the whole way through. Very tight songwriting. Some big time Every Time I Die energy too on some of the riffs, like opener Breath of the Black Muse. You kick in the door and you think of Every Time I Die. And mind you, this is just a year after Hot Damn came out. Definitely an album with mathcore elements front and center the whole way through. It's also coming out the same year as End of the Heartache, The Curse, The Oncoming Storm, You Fail Me, They're Only Chasing Safety, Of Malice and the Magnum Heart, and Miss Machine, just to name a few. So this is a pretty big year for metalcore just solidifying itself in the zeitgeist. And I'd say it fits in really well alongside stuff like early Norma Jean and Every Time I Die the best. This one feels a little bit more mainstream in appeal. There's definitely less experimentation. There's even a music video for the Rising End, but it's so consistent. It's super heavy. I'm engaged all the way through. There's lots of memorable riffs too. Like, that's not something I can necessarily say about their earlier discography, even though they kind of do some weirder, more standout stuff in some of those albums. Like, this is the one where all the way through, like, there are so many things I remember. Like, truly, This Is the End. But what a banger. So many great parts on this one. And just as a big fan of this style overall, I love it. I'm going to put it at S tier. And again, that may be sacrilege to put that over, especially Liberate, but that's just how I feel in terms of like re-listenability, consistency, tightness, songwriting, everything. I feel like even though this album is maybe a little bit more interesting, a little bit more unique, and kind of fleshes out that extra ZAO spice, I just think this album is stronger in different ways. Then we have The Fear Is What Keeps Us Here in 2006. More lineup changes here. We've got Dan still on vocals, Scott on guitar and some clean vocals, Martin Lunn on bass and backing vocals, and Jeff Gretz on drums. But this will be more or less the kind of stable lineup now, give or take Russ moving forwards. We're on the mathcore train again. Lots of great riffs on this one. Lots of very like technical stuff going on, especially in the first couple tracks. I've seen people call this their most like abrasive. It's a very aggressive album. It's very fast, just balls to the wall with tracks like Physician, Heal Thyself, Everything You Love Will Soon Fly Away, Total Ragers. Also My Love, We've Come Back from the Dead. More live sound in the production too on this one. A little bit standout in that element. You may take it or leave it with that. I'm not as big a fan of how this album sounds in comparison to some of the others, but it's pretty good. It's pretty darn good. It's just not quite as memorable overall, I would say. I've spent less time listening to this album over the years too, so maybe that has something to do with it. It's also one of my least favorite cover arts. ZAO has so many cool cover arts, and I like the concept of this one. It even sort of feels like it sort of alludes to what they later do with the Crimson Corridor, but I hate how they placed the text, I think, is what sort of ruins it for me. If they had structured that a little bit differently, it would look better. But ultimately, I'm going to put this one at B tier. And then there's Awake in 2009, same lineup. Notable that Tim Lambesis was involved with the production on this one. 1 Million Outstretched Arms of Nothing opens like a Norma Jean song. It does kind of peter out after that, which is something I would say about a couple of the tracks on this album. There's some really great stuff here too, though, especially on some of the openers, like Entropica, cool start-stop riff, catchy singing on this one. Then there's more melodic stuff like Romance of the Southern Spirit, which is like one of their most oddly hopeful and positive sounding songs with these big shimmering guitars. It's very much a standout in that way. And honestly, this whole album is more melodic in general, more singing. Some mild Hopesfall vibes is like the main thing that kept coming into my head as I was re-listening to it. I also like the bass-driven part on Quiet Passenger Part 2, some groovy guitar hooks on this one. Another solid, albeit just different kind of experience. I would say that this is a very standout album tonally from the rest of the discography. It sounds very different from a lot of their different stuff, which is another cool thing about ZAO, is that they're constantly trying new things and varying up their sound, and I appreciate that, especially in a band with so many albums. I don't want them all to sound the same. I think I'd even say I like it a smidge better than the previous album overall, even if it doesn't have the same kind of crazier, heavier songs, so I'm going to put that right at the middle of B tier. All right, and then they took quite a bit of a hiatus, but came back in 2016. Russ back again on this album with the Well-Intentioned Virus. Banger of a comeback, y'all. Like, honestly, this is one of the best comeback albums out there, I would say. They kept their core sound while improving on it in virtually every way. Great production, big step up there. The drums sound huge. There's more like tribal sound on it too, especially on tracks like Broken Pact Blues. Big, sludgy, groovy riffs kicking the door on that opening track. The title track is also fun with its constant noodling. It has kind of like this botch sounding hook to it. And another pretty concise album too in comparison to the newer one, with lots of around like 3-minute songs, plenty of headbangers with the chaotic Xenophobe, Jinba Ataig among my favorites with its constantly shifting rotation of riffs and Every Time I Die southern swagger to it. Apocalypse has strong Poison the Well vibes too, like something off of You Come Before You or Versions, which is a big double thumbs up from me. Haunting Pools has some Gojira energy to it, and honestly, this is even better than I remember it. I've listened to it a lot, and especially when it came out, but it had been a minute since I came back and really like played it all the way through. And man, this is basically a perfect album. There's not a moment wasted. I'd say this is easy S tier, and it's really neat for me when I rank bands and get to see their latest material hitting the top tier. Like that's cool to see. It's definitely not always the case, but here I would say so. And then finally, 2021, we've got The Crimson Corridor. This is their darkest album yet, I have to say. I think even maybe more so than Liberate. And it's interesting too, because I going back and re-listening to the discography, and especially listening to that one, I hear parallels between those two. Like, this album could sound unprecedented if you'd only listened to some of like the newer ones, but I think in terms of like the darkness and the slower parts and the dynamics, there's a lot of connections to be made with that album. But then also with a lot of like doom and post-metal influences folded into their usual sound, lots of melancholy, lots of depression, even more so than before, but still utterly stunning. Like, this is a beautiful album. There's a reason why I've named it one of my favorite albums of 2021 so far. Definitely some more like Gojira vibes on the heavier tracks like Ship of Theseus, but then moody atmosphere on Croatoan and RIPW. I also really love Transitions. You can check out my extended thoughts on this one in the full album review that I did, but it's suffice it to say, it's great. I gave it a very high score and really enjoy it, but I will say it's not as readily re-listenable due to the dark concept of it, but it's definitely their most daring and mature. I'll put it that way. So this is like their magnum opus of inner demons, which is kind of intense. I I think of it the same way I'll say as like Requiem for a Dream. Like, I love that movie, but I'm not going to watch it every day. Like, that would that would be pretty miserable. I'm going to come back to it repeatedly and just elevate it to this sense of awe that I have for it. But suffice it to say, I'm still going to put it at S tier. It's hard for me to decide which one goes at the top. Like, in terms of just overall scope and innovation and everything, I feel like The Crimson Corridor honestly maybe should be at the top. But as far as like the album, I think across the board is the best, and I will re-listen to the most, and just fits my personal style the most, then I think it's the Well-Intentioned Virus. But yeah, there you have it. Those are my ZAO rankings. And if you want to know just in order too, removing the tiers, it's always from right to left, bottom to top. So going like da 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 da. And again, with this final tier being particularly difficult, Lots of points for entry for new listeners too, which is kind of neat. It was something I was thinking about a lot re-listening to this discography. Many people from many different backgrounds and who like different styles of music. I think I would recommend different albums for them to start with. Like if you're more of a doom and atmosphere kind of person, I'd say either Liberate or the Crimson Corridor. If you're more just like a straight up mathcore fan, I'm gonna recommend the Well-Intentioned Virus or The Funeral of God. And then there's plenty, if you want something a little bit more melodic, I'm going to recommend Awake. If you want something a little bit more raw, you get the idea. But that said, I'm really interested, especially on this video, to hear you all share your own rankings in the comments, because I think in particular with ZAO, it lends itself well to a lot of different interpretations and rankings. And, you know, everyone's ranking is always equally valid, but I think here in particular, I'll bet someone could still give like a really solid justification for that. But yeah, that is ZAO. But don't go anywhere. I got plenty more videos coming right after this one. I have a whole playlist of these tier lists that you can check out. Sometimes I'll do like a whole genre, like I have a metalcore tier list, I have a mathcore tier list, and then more band rankings. I've got a lot of other metalcore and mathcore bands that I've ranked, including like the Dillinger Escape Plan. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.